All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig and a Pickle Krug Show with a little 49er video as we break down a very interesting article on Bleacher Report that talks about the players that potentially could still be cut from every NFL roster ahead of the upcoming 2026 season. Who do they predict will be the Niners veteran or best players still cut? And also, are there any players that are going to be cut that might be of interest to the 49ers? We're going to hit that right now. But of course, we're brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Check them out. They're in Emeryville, Corte Madera. They're opening soon in Petaluma. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. All right, let's share the screen, and we will talk a little bit about this Bleacher Report article. Bleacher Report's got some interesting articles, and they've got a good one up right now. It's written by Mo Moten. It's called The Best Player Who Could Still Be Cut from Every NFL Roster in the 2026 Season. And it just talks about how NFL teams are kicking off their OTAs and the competition for roster spots post-draft gets pretty severe. And then, of course, this all leads into training camp. And at the end of training camp is the cut down from 90-man camp rosters to 53-man regular season rosters, and a whole slew of players are going to get cut at the end of camp. And sometimes it's players that just can't play in the NFL. A lot of times it's just players that no longer fit on the roster they're on, usually because some collection of players were either signed in free agency or drafted in the April draft that gave a particular team a surplus. And suddenly they're like, hey, you know what? We were going to keep this player, but now we're not because we've got a surplus at the position and we're going to cut this guy free. So we're going to go into, what players out there could make sense for the 49ers. And it's all because of this best player who could be cut from this NFL Bleacher Report article. So we'll move that out of the way. And, the first guy I want to talk about is Colby Parkinson. Parkinson is on this list. The Rams may wind up cutting Colby Parkinson. And really, if you think about Parkinson probably is coming off his best year as a pro, former Stanford tight end. 49ers could use a tight end. He caught 43 passes for 408 yards and 8 touchdowns last season. But the Rams, who have been hoarding tight ends recently, did select Terrence Ferguson and Max Clare in the second round of the previous 2 drafts. And they've signed Tyler Higbee, their veteran tight end, to a contract extension. So if the Rams keep 4 tight ends at the roster cut down like they did last year, Colby Parkinson could be on the outs because of a contract. The Rams can save $7 million by cutting him. He is a free agent at the end of the year. So let's talk a little bit about Parkinson. Parkinson is a big tight end, 6'7" and a quarter, 252 pounds, long arms, 33 and a quarter inch arms, always had big hands, 9 5/8 inch hands. Not a burner, right? Ran 4.77 coming out of Stanford, 1.65 in the 10-yard split, 32.5-inch vertical. Not crazy strong, only 18 reps of the bench coming out. And Stanford, though, has been a tight end factory. Kobe Fleener, Zach Ertz, Dalton Schultz, and others. And Caden Smith. I mean, we could go right down the list. Ben Urasek, who transferred away to Georgia. Stanford has had a lot of good tight ends. Elijah Higgins is in the NFL with the Cardinals. So Parkinson, is a receiving tight end. He's got height. He's got great length. He can create matchup issues, especially in the red zone. He's a big wide receiver. That's kind of what he is. He's like a big red zone wide receiver. He can attack all 3 levels of the defense pretty effectively. He's got good breaks, very crisp route runner in and out of the breaks. He can create route leverage. He can high point the ball. He can pluck it away from his body. He's a hands catcher. He's not a body catcher. And he's a solid player. Now, he's always been a little on the thin side, and so he doesn't really have a real, impact on the line of scrimmage. Not the greatest run blocker. He's more of a big, rangy, they list him as a tight end, but he's a big wide receiver. And, he can be lined up and all over the formation. He was very productive in the red zone at Stanford. And, this is a guy that definitely is starting to play his best football in a multiple tight end set. A guy like Colby Parkinson, who's got Bay Area ties. Once upon a time, Seattle took him in the 4th round in the 2020 draft out of Stanford. And, he knows the division, right? He's played for Seattle. He's played for the Rams. He's a free agent in 2027. I think he's a perfect option for the 49ers. Niners are thin at tight end. They had Mason Pline work out at the mini camp, but Parkinson's a more accomplished player. He's a better red zone threat. He's a bigger body. And, that is a name that I think makes a lot of sense. If you talked about the 49ers at tight end, what do the Niners have right now? I think this is probably one of the thinnest positions on the entire football team is tight end. So the 49ers could use help at tight end for sure. And really what my interest in this is I just don't want to see George Kittle rush back. He's the face of the franchise. We'll share the Niner depth chart. Here it is at tight end. So you got Kittle in red, tore the Achilles in January. So says he wants to be back for week 1. I don't think it's in anybody's interest to see him back in week 1. You have Jake Tonjes, who's a receiver, not a blocker. You have Luke Farrell, who's a blocker, not a receiver. You have Braden Willis and Hayden Rucci, who are probably not NFL. And then you have Khalil Dinkins, who's a really strong blocker. So, without Kittle, Dinkins is going to really challenge Luke Farrell for his blocking tight end role. And Parkinson and Tonjes, would compete for that receiving tight end role. And maybe they both make the team. Maybe out of those 4 guys, 3 of them make the team. Willis gets cut. Rucci gets cut. But let's just say the Niners go with Dinkins and Tonjes. And then maybe Luke Farrell. And, Kittle would probably start on some kind of list to start the year because of the injury. And then you have Parkinson. So I like the idea. I think Colby Parkinson, he's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. As I said, he knows the division. He's a really smart kid. He went to Stanford. You have to be smart to play tight end in the 49er offense. You have to be smart. There's a reason the Niners liked Mason Pline as a prospect because he's a mechanical engineering major. He's very, very smart. There's a reason that Tonjes has done so well adapting to the 49ers system at tight end. He's really, really smart. He went to Cal. Look at the guys who struggled. Cam Latu. Cam Latu's plenty athletic to play tight end. He just couldn't mentally grasp the whole thing. He kept making mistakes. It was mental overload. He had so many mistakes that he was thinking out there. He never really allowed his true talent to kind of bubble up because he just always was thinking about some shift, some motion. You could see he was mentally taxed by the voluminous nature of a Kyle Shanahan and a Clay Kubiak offense. So you need a smart guy, and you have 2 blocking tight ends in Dinkins and Farrell, but you really only have the 1 receiving tight end in Tonjes. Parkinson would give you another one. So that's number 1, Colby Parkinson. I think Parkinson would be a phenomenal add for the 49ers. All right, who else on this list, on this Bleacher Report list, could help the 49ers? Well, one guy on this list is Arik Armstead. You think of Armstead, as a great 49er. And, he went to Jacksonville, and he's played pretty well for Jacksonville. But now he's, long in the tooth, and Jacksonville has added some new people. And I think there's a very good chance that Armstead, is going to get cut. And I don't think it's even a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So they bolstered their defensive line. The Jaguars traded for Rook Ororo from the Atlanta Falcons, and they drafted Albert Regis out of Texas A&M in the 3rd round. And so you've got, Arik Armstead, who's now entering his age 33 campaign. He's in a contract year. The Jags can save $14.5 million if they release him after June 1st, and they're going to. So he's got declining production in the second half of the year. Doesn't really fit the Jaguars depth chart if you look at what they've got at defensive line. And yet for the 49ers, this is a great 49er. This is a Walter Payton Man of the Year award winner. I mean, this is a very special guy in Arik Armstead. And Armstead, I think, is best playing inside. And that's, but he also has the ability to play outside. So, I mean, that really is intriguing because, Mikael Williams, Nick Bosa, Keon White, Sam Aquinu, Cam Sample, Romello Height, Mikhail Kamara, William Bradley King. That's what they have at defensive end right now. They got a lot of young bodies on that defensive line. I'm not saying I would pay Armstead anything. I'd give him a league minimum and an invite to camp. But he is the kind of guy, and he's got the ability to play inside. He can play outside. He could be a 5 technique and a 34 front. He's a versatile player who's very smart and can always been able to play inside and outside. So I think the Niners are pretty okay up front, outside of maybe adding like a Joey Bosa. Maybe if you could get one more, Marshall. If you could get Leonard Floyd, thinking Leonard Floyd would not be bad. Jadeveon Clowney wouldn't be bad. The Niners could probably use one more edge rusher, and Armstead is not that piece. But I did see his name on this list, and he's an interesting name. And we know how much he's beloved by the Yorks and by the 49er organization. And if it doesn't cost you anything, why wouldn't you bring him back and see if he could make your football team? So Arik Armstead's on this list, and I think he's an interesting name, a guy that I would definitely be interested in. Another guy that I think is interesting is Demario Douglas, and he goes by Pop Douglas. If we look at the 49er depth chart at wide receiver, look up here at wide receiver, they're pretty loaded. They really don't need a wide receiver. Christian Kirk, Mike Evans, Ricky Pearsall, Deshaun Stribling, Jordan Watkins, Demarcus Robinson. In fact, Demarcus Robinson's on this list because Demarcus Robinson may get cut. You got Will Pauling, you got Wesley Grimes. You've got 2 undrafted players that are pretty good. Then you got 2, young veterans in Jordan Watkins and Jacob Cowing who run in the 4.3s, and the Niners invested 4th-round picks and consecutive drafts in those guys. And then there's, of course, Stribling. He's going to make the team. Kirk's going to make the team. Evans is going to make the team. Pearsall is going to make the team. So you don't really have any real openings at wide receiver. But one guy who is kind of intriguing to me is Demario Pop Douglas. Now, Pop Douglas plays for the Patriots, but I think he's likely to be cut. I mean, if you look at the Patriot depth chart, I think Demario Douglas is likely to be cut. Now, here he is working out.
Yeah.
And just getting ready for camp. But Demario Douglas is a tough little receiver, and he's quick, and he can get separation. He can make plays. And going into last year, you could argue that he was the Patriots' number 1 wide receiver. And he definitely moves well. He's explosive. He's tough. I would definitely be interested in this guy just because you just don't know. I mean, I like Jordan Watkins, but I don't know if he can make the team. I like Jacob Cowing, but I don't know if he can stay healthy. This would just be another quick wide receiver who can separate. Doesn't have a lot of size, but he's quick and he's tough and he's productive. And he's a veteran who could help you at wide receiver. Is it a real need for the Niners? Probably not. But to me, this is a really good receiver that could shake free right before camp. And if you could get him for a league minimum, I'd do it. I would absolutely do it. Bring him in, see if he can beat out those guys. The Krug Show is presented by Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks app. Prize Picks is super simple, and you just pick more or less on player stats or even game outcomes and build your lineup. It's available in most states, including California. So if you haven't checked it out yet, use code HMA. When you play $5, you get $50 in lineups instantly. You don't want to hand anything to Watkins or Cowing or any of those guys. This last guy, to me, is really exciting. Now, it's Roschon Johnson of the Chicago Bears. He's never I loved Roschon Johnson at Texas. He's never found his role with the Bears. He's never found any real rhythm. 138 carries, 519 total yards, 8 touchdowns. There's been some injuries. There's been some inconsistent usage. They've used him on the goal line. They've used him on special teams. He fell out of favor as soon as Ben Johnson took over the team. The Bears save $1.14 million in cap space by moving on. Roschon Johnson is a good player, and you can never have enough quality backs, especially in a run system like the 49ers have. And I just think if you look at the Niners depth chart at running back, it looks loaded, but in reality, they could definitely add a body here. If you look at this depth chart, okay, obviously you got CMC and you got Jordan James, who's coming off a year where he didn't do anything. He can catch. He's not that fast. He's got a great build for running back, but as I said, he's not a burner and he didn't play very much last year. And I just kind of wonder about him. Then you got Kalon Black, who's a really good player, who's going to make this team for sure. So he's RB2. So you got McCaffrey as RB1 and Kalon Black as RB2. But the rest of this thing is a big freaking question mark. Juice is obviously a very good fullback. But the rest of these backs are just like, what? Who are they? Jordan James was a 5th-round pick who doesn't run fast, catches well, but didn't have a good rookie year. Isaac Guerendo was a 4th-round pick in the previous draft. He was a 2024 4th-round pick. And I don't even think he's a real football player. I mean, he's fast and he's big, but he doesn't he doesn't have football instincts. Fumbles, doesn't look natural, doesn't seem like he's improving, hasn't won over the coaches, doesn't have the confidence of Kyle Shanahan. To me, he seems like a cut candidate or a trade candidate. He's an awesome athlete. He's one of the best athletes on the team. So big, so fast. But there's no real role for Guerendo. And obviously, if Shanahan doesn't trust you, you don't play. If Bobby T doesn't trust you, you don't get on the field. And they don't trust that guy. So he might as well be cut. Then there's Patrick Taylor Jr. And Patrick Taylor is a special teamer who runs upright. He's pretty athletic. He's pretty tough. Veteran guy. He's got some special teams experience. Not a horrible player. Decent last running back on your roster, but not a starter. Like if McCaffrey goes down, you're not going with Patrick Taylor. You're not. You're going with Kalon Black. But you're not going with Isaac Guerendo. Now, the other back here is a little bit of a wild card is Sincere McCormick from University of Texas, San Antonio, who, is a kind of a borderline NFL back. He's kind of a practice squad type player. He runs low to the ground. He's very efficient. I like him. I really do like him. I think he can. I really believe if the Niners, this was their running back depth chart, and they get to the game and Christian McCaffrey's hurt, I would start Kalon Black. And then, but after Kalon Black, it's a Jordan James, Sincere McCormick discussion. And I have, enthusiasm for the upside of Jordan James. But if I really had to put money on the table, I'd rather go with Sincere McCormick. He's more efficient. He keeps his head down. He's a really dependable between the tackles, churning kind of a running back. Is he a star? No, he's not a star, but he's solid. So I think they could use another running back. And Roschon Johnson would be a good option. He absolutely would be. He's got strength. He's got power. Really like Roschon Johnson's potential. And, of course, Kyle went to Texas. Kyle went to Texas. This guy went to Texas. So maybe there's that Texas connection. But I just think Roschon Johnson is a really underrated running back that has just not, for whatever reason, blossomed in Chicago. They got Kyle Monangi, they got DeAndre Swift, they got other guys. But here he is, Roschon Johnson. He's got size, he's got some power, he's got some athleticism, he's got some contact balance. He was a good player at Texas. I'd be very interested in Roschon Johnson. If they could get Roschon Johnson going into camp, I think you do need one more back. And he would be great. He would be great. He's a better running back, I think, than, Patrick Taylor's a special teamer. This guy's got better instincts than Garendo. I think he's a little bit more dynamic overall than Sincere McCormick. He can catch it a little bit. He's a bigger guy with a little bit better speed. So CMC is going to be the guy. Kalon Black's going to be RB2. We're talking about RB3 here, but I like Roschon Johnson, and I like a bigger back who can move the pile a little bit. I just think if you came right down to it, Garendo, Patrick Taylor, Sincere McCormick, or you could sign Roschon Johnson. I'll sign Roschon Johnson, and give him that last running back spot. So those are the guys that are interesting in this article. It's Arik Armstead, it's Pop Douglas, it's Roschon Johnson, who are it's Colby Parkinson. And then the one guy that they say for the 49ers who could wind up being cut out of this group is Demarcus Robinson. And so it's like, if you're cutting Demarcus Robinson, why do you need Pop Douglas? I guess you can make that argument. But yeah, I hear that too. I hear that. It's an interesting article because Bleacher Report, they're just kind of throwing stuff against the wall. But it is interesting that there's going to be some good players cut loose, and the 49ers have some needs. You notice there was no awesome left guard cut loose. There was no incredible dynamic pass rusher cut loose. Those needs are going to have to be filled in other spots. But if you could get a Colby Parkinson and add him to your roster, I like that. If you could get a Roschon Johnson and add him to your roster, I like that. If Arik Armstead wants to come in and compete for, a roster spot, he's so versatile and so smart. I don't think that's a bad idea either. So a lot of interesting names there for sure in that Bleacher Report article. All right, we should tell you the Krug Show is presented by Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks app. Prize Picks is super simple. You just pick more or less on player stats or even game outcomes and build your lineup. It's available in most states, including California. If you haven't checked it out yet, use code HMA. When you play $5, you're going to get $50 in lineups instantly. Also, thank you to Alomar Marina. Check out their website, alomarmarina.net. Float while you dine on the Sacramento River. They're at 5999 Garden Highway. They're open Wednesday through Sunday. Try the shrimp tacos. You're going to love the Alomar. Also, thank you to Novato Chevrolet. When I buy a Chevrolet, I only buy it from Novato Chevrolet. Go see my guy, David Corral. Gus, the owner, is a personal friend. It's a great dealership. Top car dealership voted by Carfax, family owned for 50 years. Friendly staff, huge selection, easy financing options. Bay Area's EV headquarters. When I buy a Chevrolet, I buy it from David Corral and my good friends at Novato Chevrolet. And last but certainly not least, thank you to our good friends at Sharp Corners Sports Cards and Collectibles. The great Anthony Catania is at 831-521-5264. And he's great follow on Instagram. Sharp Corners 831 on the gram. If you're a Krug Show viewer or listener, and you tell Anthony, he will give you free shipping on whatever you order at Sharp Corners. And thanks to you guys for supporting The Krug Show on YouTube,